This is continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage.
In the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
We're up to the fourth segment of our continuous coverage in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell for today. Let's go to the courtroom.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. Before you start with the examination, can I have a quick sidebar with counsel? All right, we're back on the record on CR 22211624. Ms. Blake, you're continuing your direct examination of Dr. Christensen. You continue at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. So we've been talking about the autopsy and what all that entails. After doing the external, when you started to look at the internal part of Ms. Daybell, including her organs, did her organs appear normal?
For the most part, they appeared essentially normal, except for changes related to embalming. And there was also fluid present in the lungs and sort of a frothy, dried foam present in her airways.
As part of your investigation, were you shown or did you review photos that were taken from the scene of where Tammy Daybell was discovered?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, I'm going to ask to publish State's Exhibit 295J.
It can be published. It's been previously admitted also.
When you talk about the substance in the lungs, the frothy substance, would it be similar to what we see here?
Yes, this picture is a little bit, I don't know, blurry is the right word, but this picture shows what we call pulmonary edema foam or froth, what's sometimes referred to as a foam cone that exudes, comes up from the lungs through the airways and out either the nose or the mouth or sometimes both. It's a combination of fluid, which has leaked from the capillaries into the air spaces and then mixes with the protein and other things that are in those air spaces that normally help keep them open and creates this bubbly, frothy fluid that then is sometimes visible on the surface as it was here.
And is that what pulmonary edema is?
This is a manifestation of pulmonary edema. You can certainly have quite florid pulmonary edema without it ever coming out, and that is largely a post-mortem phenomenon. It doesn't generally happen when people are alive, but if their edema is sufficiently severe as that as it accumulates or the fluid builds up, the air builds up in those spaces, it will sometimes push up and out of the nose and mouth.
Had you, in fact, conducted other autopsies where this frothy foam had been present?
Yes.
And is pulmonary edema actually a cause of death?
It is not.
Would it be just a result of the cause of death?
Yeah, generally speaking. So the pulmonary edema is a finding or it's a physical manifestation of some underlying pathologic process. So we most commonly see this sort of change in the setting of opiate intoxications, heroin overdoses, oxycodone overdoses, and those sorts of things. But it's very common also in the setting of drowning, can be seen in asphyxial deaths of all kinds, can also be seen in the setting of heart failure. There's a number of things that can cause pulmonary edema, but the pulmonary edema is not what leads to the person's death. It's the same thing that caused their death is also what causes the pulmonary edema. The pulmonary edema is just a manifestation of the cause of death, and there can be different things that cause it. Just like with hemorrhage is a non-specific thing. You can bleed to death from lots of different things. You can bleed to death because you're shot. You could bleed to death because you're stabbed. You could bleed to death because you're in a car crash and suffered some fractures and other things. Lots of different things can lead to hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is sort of a mechanism or a finding in the setting of those other things, but it's those other things that are the cause of death. And in the context of pulmonary edema, it's whatever caused the pulmonary edema would be the cause of death.
And is pulmonary edema a manifestation or a mechanism or a finding associated with asphyxiation being the cause of death?
Yes, it is.
Did this in part play into your finding that asphyxiation was the cause of death here?
It did.
And that was done in conjunction with ruling out the other causes of death that could result in or have a manifestation of pulmonary edema?
Yes.
We had also talked about you conducting a review of the external body of Tammy Daybell, and you had indicated you noted some bruising.
Yes, that's correct.
And I believe you also indicated that bruising could be indicative of someone being restrained.
It could be.
And Judge, I have States Exhibit 179A and 179B. These are blank diagrams, which I would intend to have handed to the victim to have him make some markings. So I do not have copies for counsel or the court at this time, assuming they would want copies once the markings are made.
I'm assuming she meant witness, not victim.
Yes.
Yes.
I did mean witness.
Very
Thank
well.
you for that correction, Mr. Thomas.
179A and B then have been previously shown in a sidebar to counsel in the court. They can be presented to the witness. If any markings are made on those, we'll get copies made for the court's exhibit copy file as well as the defense, assuming they become admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I had intended to wait to move for the admission until after the markings were made and counsel had an opportunity to review them as well.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake.
I can proceed to mark them.
Yes, Dr. Christensen, and what I was going to ask you to do is if you could mark on those exhibits where you located the bruising or the external injuries that you were referencing.
Okay.
And for the record, Dr. Christensen, what are you using to make the markings?
It's like a Pentel Energel pen.
The color of the ink.
Blue, it looks
Okay.
like. I haven't written with it yet.
Blue ink pen, thank you.
Yes. Okay.
And
I also labeled the arms right and left.
Thank you. And I believe on those exhibits, one says front at the bottom and one says back.
That's correct.
And have you had an opportunity to mark on both of those?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would ask that those be shown to both court and counsel.
All right. We'll have the bailiff assist with that, please. I'll take a quick look at them and then they can be handed to defense counsel. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. I don't know if there's any way you can make a record as to what you saw, but I think we need to make a record of some sort.
And Your Honor, once I was shown them again, I was intending to make a record.
All right, if you can do that, Ms. Blake. And I guess just starting with the fact that there were no markings on those when the witness received them and no one else has marked on them.
Yes. And I think if we can put that into the record, I don't believe anyone has marked on it but the witness. With regard to 179A, that diagram is labeled front at the bottom. You have indicated several markings. Could you indicate what those markings represent?
Sure. Each of those marks, and they are certainly not to scale, nor am I an artist, but they are representations of bruises that were present on her arms and chest.
And by one hand is a letter R, and one hand is the letter L. Did you add those?
I did.
And those represent?
Just right and left, just to clarify, especially with the back.
And to be clear, you did not write the front. That was already written on there when handed to you, correct?
Correct.
And then with regard to the 179B, it's labeled back at the bottom. You did not write the word back. Is that correct?
I did not.
And and on the last one, I guess I should indicate a total of 6 blue dots on the one labeled front. Does that comport with how many you added?
I believe so, yes.
And on the one labeled back, the 179B, there are 4 markings. And what would those markings represent?
Those are also bruises of the same sort. And again, not to scale. They are of varying sizes, but roughly in the same size range as what those pictures depict.
And these are bruises that you observed during the autopsy of Tammy Daybell?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I would ask for the admission of States Exhibit 179A and 179B.
Any objection?
Based on the testimony, I have no objection.
Okay, and the court would consider those as demonstrative exhibits?
Yes, and I would ask to be able to publish them.
You can publish them, and they are admitted.
And this is the first exhibit. It's labeled front at the bottom. Can you, and you've already talked about these marks indicating bruises, they're not to scale. Can you put into the record where on the body you had observed these bruises?
Sure. Those injuries on the right arm are on the upper right arm over the lateral biceps area. The one on the right forearm is at the edge, the outside edge, with the palm forward, which is what is typically described as normal anatomic position. So this diagram is such that the person is standing with their palms forward, and that mark on the right forearm is towards the outside with the hands positioned that way forward. The mark on the chest is on the upper portion of the chest above the breast on the chest, and then the one on the left arm is over the left biceps.
And this is States Exhibit 179B. It's labeled back at the bottom. And you've already talked about those marks a little bit, but can you indicate into the record and for the jury where exactly you found those bruises?
Sure. Again, this is a picture of the back of the body. So the two on the upper arm, those 2 bruises are located over the triceps area on the back of the upper arm. And then the 2 on the forearm, again, this is in anatomic position with the palms forward. So these are on the back of the forearm with them positioned that way.
And did you discover any bruising on the lower extremities?
Did not.
When you conduct the examination, do you document any external injuries as you go?
Yes.
Were photos, in fact, taken of these bruises that you observed?
They were.
And Your Honor, I have what's been marked States Exhibit 178A through 178B. I believe counsel has a copy and the court has a courtesy copy. I'm not sure if we have an official copy in the record yet.
I've got the court's courtesy copies. And counsel, on a couple of these, as we previously discussed, I think they ought to be shown privately to the jurors, as we've done previously with other graphic photos. So do you want to organize those in such a way that we have a group that are not shown that way so we don't have to go back and forth? Is that possible? So we've got A and C and
I think we could make it, I think they just go in order of documenting the bruises, sometimes getting in closer based on the area where the photo was taken.
Okay.
And I think maybe what I would ask is if the court would allow, because and I understand these have not been admitted yet either, but for purposes of starting with, if I could have the witness shown the exhibit and then possibly for reference have him be able to look at the exhibits in order, but pull the ones that need to be published separately and publish those after.
Very well. That would be great.
I don't know if counsel has an objection to that, but.
No objection.
Okay, we'll do it.
So if I can have the witness shown this copy. If you could look through those photographs.
Okay.
Do those appear to be an accurate depiction of what you observed during the autopsy?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, I would move for the admission of States Exhibits 178A through 178B.
And that's through, you're just moving to admit A and B?
A through V. Sorry, V is in Victor.
V, okay. 178, A through V. Any objection?
May I voir dire and aid?
You may voir dire.
Dr. Christensen, these photographs that were taken, they were taken at your request during the autopsy, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And these were taken in Salt Lake City at your pathology clinic or where you do your autopsies?
Yes, at the Office of the Medical Examiner.
And you were present when these were taken?
Yes.
And are these a complete copy of all the autopsy photos that were taken?
I don't believe so, no. There are many more pictures that we took besides these.
Okay. But as far as the ones that are represented here, did you review these after the autopsy in relation to when you were writing your report?
Yes.
In conjunction with that report?
Yes.
Okay. And some of these indicate that, well, I'm not going to get into that yet. I have no objection, Your Honor.
Very well. Exhibits 178, A through V are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And pursuant to what the court's indicated, if I could have the witness retain a copy to reference as we are publishing only some of them, is my understanding right now.
Okay. I'll have.
And I can either give him my copy. They have the same exhibit stickers, so whether I retain the copy he was just looking at or this one, I don't know if the court has a preference.
All right. The ones that are published should probably be the originals, so when they are published, so we'll have the witness have the copy exhibit from your folder.
That would be fine. Yes. And doctor, as we go through these, some of these are not going to be published at this time, but in order for you to have the reference, because I believe they go in order where some of the injuries were documented. On that first photo that is not going to be published at this time, 178A. Can you indicate what that depicts?
It's a picture of Ms. Daybell's left upper chest, showing the bruise on her chest, left chest.
And that next photo, 178B, is that a closer view of that same bruise?
Yes, it is.
And Your Honor, I would ask to publish 178B.
You can publish that. Thank you, Ms. Blake.
Is that the bruise that you were referencing?
Yes.
And then again, we're not publishing right at this time 178C, but can you indicate what is depicted in that photo?
178C shows Ms. Daybell's right upper arm and the right side of her chest with the bruises on her right biceps.
And is 178D a closer view of that?
It is.
And Your Honor, just so I don't ask in between each one, the ones that have been approved to be published, can I go ahead and publish those?
Yes, you may, Ms. Blake.
And that's the closer up view of that bruising?
Yes, it is.
And then if we look at the next photo, 178E, what are we seeing in this photo?
This shows Ms. Daybell's right forearm, the back of her right forearm, and the right side of her body, but with the bruises on her right forearm.
And in 178F, is that a closer view of the same bruise?
It is. Bruises, plural.
Oh, bruises. In 178G, can you indicate what we're seeing in this photo?
Yes, this is the front side of Ms. Daybell's right forearm with a bruise.
And that 178H?
Is a close-up of G, close-up of the same injury.
And then we are not publishing at this time 178I, but can you indicate what that shows?
178I shows a section of the one of the injuries on the right biceps where we have taken a tissue sample and made an incision into the arm to demonstrate that there is hemorrhage in the tissues, that the bruise is in fact a bruise, and shows also the cassette, the little plastic device that we place the tissue in to be prepared for microscopic examination.
And if I publish 178J, is that another view of the incision you were just describing?
I believe so, but I can't be certain. It's very, very close up, but I can't tell you for sure if it's the same or not. I think it is, but
if I go to 178K.
Yes, 178K is the same injury and the same section.
And so just to go over that a little bit, you indicate you end up taking a sample of where the bruise is.
Yes.
And what does that allow you to determine?
As I mentioned previously, it allows us to look at that tissue under the microscope to see what sort of progression that injury has gone through. Is it just hemorrhage, which is what we see generally in the initial stages of any injury, just bleeding into the tissue in a blunt injury? Over time, those soft tissues go through a progression where inflammatory cells come in an attempt to clean up the injury. Over time, the nature of those inflammatory cells change. Eventually, you end up with tissue cell types that make scar tissue, and then eventually you just end up with scar. And all of that takes place in a somewhat protracted way over several days to weeks. But looking at that under the microscope at least gives us some indication of where in that process the injury is.
And as you were going through this process with the bruising on Miss Daybell, were you able to make any determination with regard to the age of the bruising?
All of it, all of the sections that we look at under the microscope showed only hemorrhage. They were acute injuries.
And would you be able to say if they occurred prior to or after her death?
Most likely prior. Certainly you can inflict bruises on an individual who has recently died if you strike them, drop them, any number of other things. But once circulation stops, you tend to not have a lot of accumulation of hemorrhage within the tissue simply because there's no circulation, no blood pressure.
And on this slide in particular, is that the sample that's sitting in the plastic?
Yes.
And with regard to that, and I'm not sure if there's a laser pointer up there,
Yes,
there might be. Can you describe where we're seeing the hemorrhage and what it should look like?
Sure. So this piece of tissue here, this is the skin surface along the closest to the number here. This is the skin surface. Normally, all of this tissue beneath here is what we call subcutaneous fat. It normally looks like this yellow tissue over here. It's just bright yellow, like any kind of fatty tissue. And all of this dark discoloration is hemorrhage within that fatty tissue.
And I believe we are not publishing photo 178L right now, but could you describe what's in that photo?
It is, again, a picture of an incision into an injury on her right biceps, which shows hemorrhage in the underlying soft tissue.
And then if we look at photo 178M.
This is a photo of a section taken from the right forearm. Again, shows the skin surface.
Sorry, I was trying to adjust the light a little bit there. That should disappear.
Again, the skin surface is along here. This is bright yellow for the most part, except for a little bit of hemorrhage in the soft tissue immediately below the middle of that. And
did that, again, were you able to determine the time on that bruising or when you thought it would have occurred in relation to death?
It was, again, acute injury, only hemorrhage, no evidence of any inflammatory response. So occurred around the time of death, maybe shortly after, but certainly, more likely to have occurred prior to death and could have occurred prior to death anywhere up to a few hours.
And 178N, is that just another view of the same?
Yes, it appears to be.
And we are not publishing 178O right now, but could you describe what is depicted in 178O?
178O is a photograph of a small scar that was present on the right chest wall.
And we are not publishing 178P right now, but can you indicate what is depicted in that photo?
178P depicts incisions into the bruise on the left biceps.
And then looking at 178Q, are you able to determine what that is an image of?
Q is a closer up image of O. It's that same small scar on the chest wall.
And that scarring was an older injury?
Yes, it was completely healed.
Do you simply document other external injuries that you notice, including older scarring?
Yes, we do.
And then looking at 178R, are you able to determine what that is an image of?
This is a closer-up image of 178P, the injury on the left biceps.
And again, was a sample taken from there?
Yes, it was.
And that was done for the same reason with regard to determining the bruise?
Yes, it determines, one, that it is a bruise, and two, gives us some broad range in which it was inflicted or received.
And we are not admitting 178S right now, but can you indicate what's depicted in that image?
S depicts the same injury on the left biceps with the tissue sample removed and placed in a cassette.
And 178T?
The same thing, just closer up.
And this one has the tissue sample by it?
Yes.
And again, if you could indicate when we're looking at that in the sample, where's the hemorrhage or the bruising?
Again, this is the skin surface. This is two sections through that area. Skin surface on this piece, skin surface on this piece. This yellow is normal subcutaneous fat, and these darker areas are evidence of injury or hemorrhage.
And with regard to 178U?
This represents a close-up view of the bruise on the left chest.
And 178V?
178V again shows the same area with the sample removed and placed in the cassette.
And so, again, is that darker area where you were looking at?
Yes, this is the skin surface on the right of that image. All of this dark is hemorrhage within the tissue.
And on the prior exhibits where you had indicated the blue marks, these are the images of those the bruises from Miss Daybell's body?
Yes, they are.
And then images documenting the subsequent samples taken?
Yes.
When you looked at Tammy's body, did you notice any signs of lividity?
Yes.
And could you explain a little bit about what lividity is?
Sure. Lividity is a normal postmortem change in the body where after death, after circulation ceases, the blood in the body starts to settle within, rather than being moved around by blood pressure, it starts to settle in by gravity into whatever the lowest portion of the body is. And that, takes, we generally don't see it immediately upon death, but it will start within 30, 60, 90 minutes afterwards, and it's quite variable when that will start, but it will start sometime in a short period after death, and then eventually over time it becomes what we call fixed, meaning it doesn't move. It's if someone, for example, were to pass away and lay on the floor on their back for a couple of hours, and then were to be rolled over to their front, the lividity where that blood had started to pool on their backside would then start to redistribute to their front side because that's now the part that's down. Over time, that changes to the point where, if someone were to lay on the ground for 12 hours, say, instead of 2 hours, if you were to roll them to their front, you don't really get any substantial redistribution of that blood back to the front because it's become what we call fixed at that point. And so the longer that a person lays in one position can help you. But it's a dynamic process in the sense that it goes from, when you first see it, if you were to have the ability to watch a person after they die, when you first notice lividity, if you were to move them at that point, it would probably go away entirely. Whereas after, the more number of hours they stay in that same position, it will redistribute, as we call it, move to a different position if the body is moved to a lesser and lesser extent to the point where at some point it will no longer move at all. I'm not sure what I said. It'll no longer be movable. It will be fixed.
And where did you find lividity on Tammy's body?
On the back of her body. There's evidence that she had fixed lividity on her back with blanching. So typically if somebody laying on a flat surface, the parts that are in contact with the floor, which is generally the middle of the upper back, sometimes the shoulder blades and the buttocks and parts of the back of the legs, because of the pressure of the floor, the blood will not settle into those areas, and so they are spared, and the areas all around those areas is where you see the lividity. And that was a sort of the typical pattern that was present in Tammy's case.
Just to clarify, does lividity allow you to determine a time of death?
No, is the short answer.
And can you describe what rigor mortis is?
Yes. Rigor mortis is a post-mortem stiffening of the body where after a person passes away, they will develop, the muscles become increasingly rigid. Initially it again, much like lividity, it's a progression. Early on, you may see it only in what we call the small muscle groups. You can see it in the face, the jaw, in the hands, and then it progressed to where the extremities, the limbs will be very stiff and immovable. And if you are able to manipulate that person early in the postmortem period, you can still break it, is what we call that. You can move the body such that the rigor mortis, you're able to overcome the stiffness of the rigor mortis. But after a period of time, that becomes increasingly difficult. And the rigor becomes fully developed, generally speaking, somewhere around 12 hours after death, but that also is a very variable process. And then the body will stay stiff once that stiffness develops until the body begins to decompose, which is also variable depending on the environment in which they're found.
Can you determine a time of death off rigor mortis?
Not specifically. I mean, there are certainly, if you have, those are two of the things that we look at to try and estimate a time of death, or what we call the postmortem interval. If someone is found dead, how long have they been dead? We can look at lividity. We can look at rigor mortis. We can look at the body temperature if it's taken. There are other things that we can look at that can help us, try and narrow that window. But the longer the person has been dead, the wider the estimates would be based on any of those changes. And those changes are just not very specific.
And in this case, had you learned what time Tammy's death was reported?
I believe it was just before 6 a.m. on the day of her death.
And had you learned or heard what the description was with regard to the condition of Tammy?
She was described in the reports that we had as being stiff and cold, I believe.
And based on the description, would that indicate to you that rigor mortis had set in?
Yes.
I'm going to object to hearsay. He's not going to be able to answer this without relying on somebody else's report or something to that effect.
I'll sustain that objection.
And, Your Honor, I would argue that it goes for why he does what he does next in his investigation. He's testified that he conducts an investigation as a medical examiner.
I'll still sustain the objection at this point based on it coming through a hearsay source.
Thank you.
And, Your Honor, actually, I'll just ask another question. You were not present on the day of Tammy's death, correct?
I was not.
And you did not get the benefit of reviewing her body?
I did not see her body prior to her exhumation.
So, as a medical examiner, do you rely on external information provided?
Yes. It's a normal part of our business.
And does that external information allow you to form play into your ability to form an expert opinion regarding a time of, or at least a reference to when a person may have died?
It does.
And in this case, did you in fact gain external information?
Yes.
And did you do that as part of a review of a medical history in your investigation?
Yes.
Did it relate to your diagnosis and estimate, or any estimate you could give as to time of death?
Yes.
And based on what was reported to you, when would you estimate a time of death if you can?
So I guess I'll phrase this in a couple of ways. The presence of rigor mortis, again, as I said, it will generally begin relatively quickly after death, within an hour or two, and becomes more and more pronounced for several hours, and then will persist until decomposition ensues. So finding a body that's described as stiff is consistent with the person having been dead for at least an hour or two, but could be much longer.
So if Tammy was reported as cold and stiff at 6 a.m., you would estimate her to have been dead for a couple hours at that point, at least?
In that ballpark, yes.
You wouldn't estimate her death to have been closer in time, such as 5:30, 5:40 a.m.?
No.
And just circling back, with regard to those bruises, did they play into your ultimate determination regarding a cause of death?
Yes. In the sense that they are, consistent with her being restrained.
And again, you did look at other potential causes of death that would result in a negative autopsy.
Yes.
And you did not find those to be likely in the case of Tamara Daybell.
That's correct.
And again, what was the manner and cause of death that you determined in this matter?
We determined the cause of death to be asphyxia and the manner of death to be homicide.
If I can have just a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
Your Honor, I don't believe I have any additional questions. With regard to the exhibits that weren't published, I think we could handle it a couple ways. One would be to simply have the jury be able to review that packet. I believe the witness has already testified or indicated what those photos show.
All right, it may be more efficient, actually. So you'd be handing the packet around individually to the jurors?
Yes, if we were able to do that.
I think we can set the monitors up. We prepared to do that pretty quickly to just publish those so that the public doesn't view them, and I think we can get that done probably more quickly.
Okay.
We prepared for that this time, so.
Sure. You're good.
I think we'll also have to move some of the cameras as well, Judge. I don't know. You can see the cameras probably. I can't.
Okay, I think they've. All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Yeah, why don't you put a test one on there and we'll make sure it's all working right, and then you can publish the remainder. All right. I presume the jurors are able to see that on their monitor. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that.
I'm going to publish to the jury states Exhibit 178A. And I had previously asked you to describe what was in 178A, but can you explain to the jurors what they are seeing there?
Yes, this is Tammy's left chest and shoulder and upper arm that depicts the bruising on the upper left chest.
And for the benefit of the jurors, I just republished 178B. Is that a closer image of that same bruise?
It is.
And with regard to 178C, I'll publish that for the jurors.
I don't know if it matters, but it's upside down on my screen.
It does matter. Thank you for that. I'm looking at it blind on what you're all seeing. So can you describe what we're seeing here?
Yes, this is the bruising on her right biceps area.
And for the benefit of the jurors, I'm going to republish 178D. And is that a closer up image of the same bruising?
Yes, it is.
I.
Okay, yeah, this is a section, shows her right upper arm and chest wall with the section removed from her right biceps with the injury in that area.
And we did see some additional images of closer up photos of this, correct?
Yes, we did.
(178L).
Again, this is right biceps and right chest wall with an area of injury with a section taken through it to demonstrate the hemorrhage in the tissue. (178O). This is the scar on her right chest wall. Does not show up very well in the projected image that I'm looking at.
But is it just above the white ruler?
I can tell where it is because I can see it in this picture, but I would not be able to tell where it is
On
in
there.
that picture.
So the jurors would maybe be able to see it better on the actual photo.
Yes, I mean, it looks like a scar in the actual photo.
And with that scar, that was not indicative of any recent injury.
No.
178P.
This depicts her left upper arm. Yeah, thank you. Left upper arm and left chest and body wall with incision made into the bruise on her left biceps.
(178S).
This is the same injury on her left biceps with the sections removed and placed in the cassette.
And Your Honor, I believe that was the whole of the photos that had not been formerly published.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Blake. Does that conclude your direct?
That does conclude my direct.
Okay, we can get things reconfigured then after. So we'll be up to cross-examination. However, given the time of day, I'll suggest we do break for the day. And Mr. Thomas, will you be conducting cross?
That's what I would ask, Judge, if we could just break for the day. I know they want to hear my cross, but not 5 minutes worth.
Okay.
That wraps up segment number 4 of our continuous coverage in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. Be sure to press subscribe so you don't miss any of our continuous coverage, interviews, and discussions on the case as we have them for you right here. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.
This is continuous coverage
Continuous coverage. Continuous coverage.
in the trial of Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers Podcast.